Samsung is probably one of the handful of manufacturers out there that actually cares about making beautiful looking entry-level mid-range laptops. A lot of manufacturers treat this level of laptop segments as an afterthought, honestly speaking. But over here you see this elegance and class that almost reflects with the higher model, so it's a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down one, and for that I have a lot of respect. Now today we've got the GalaxyBook 5 360 variant, and it's rocking the latest internals out there. So this configuration in particular has Intel's Core Ultra 7 processor, 32GB of LPDDR5X memory, a nice large 1TB solid state drive. We do also have Intel's integrated 140V graphics. Furthermore, we get Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth version 5.4 standards on board, and finally this is a 16-inch AMOLED display. Now this machine really is quite exciting because firstly it's a 2-in-1 device, secondly it's rocking the latest Intel hardware, and thirdly I think this is Samsung's best work yet with the GalaxyBook. I'm going to talk about all of those things in this review and talk about everything you should watch out for as well, so let's get started. From a design perspective, things are pretty similar to the previous generation. Samsung continues to use a high quality full metallic exterior from top to bottom, which is very much welcomed. You have that same iconic silver / gunmetal gray color over here, and then you'll also notice that the laptop maintains a more square or rectangular form factor rather than having a teardrop design, so it looks more symmetrical, and I kind of like that, though it still has a very sleek profile. And then the hinge mechanisms are located on the backside. They are a little bit thicker than the standard GalaxyBook 5 would be, again for that 360 accommodation. Now as far as the weight is concerned, you have a total weight just over 3.2 pounds, which is actually very respectable for a 15.6-inch laptop that's using a full metallic exterior. Starting with the top side, like I mentioned here, again, a clean metallic exterior, no unnecessary textures, smooth to the touch, and there's a good degree of fingerprint resistance, which is always welcome. Port selection is decent, though I wouldn't call it the best in class. So on one side, you've got a HDMI 2.1 port, you do have two Thunderbolt 4 ports, both of them of course have power delivery and DisplayPort functionality. On the other side, you get the good old headphone jack, you do have a USB-A super speed port, and then finally you have, for whatever reason, a micro SD card reader than a full-size one. They clearly had the real estate to pull it off here. Just one of those odd decisions, but it's definitely a missed opportunity by Samsung. The bottom side of the laptop, like I mentioned earlier, you have a high quality metallic exterior. It is ultimately a removable lid, which is nice of course, and then you will also notice you do have a nice long air intake vent. It is located towards the center, so you can probably use this on your laps without blocking too much airflow. You will also notice you do have these two speaker cutouts on the bottom corner, so you have a dual firing bottom speaker system, which we'll talk about later as well. When you unfold this laptop, the palm rest is clean with a capital C. I mean, just look at the sheer amount of space you have here. I love the metallic inner chassis again, and that color just really goes nicely with the rest of the laptop. The trackpad is equally respectable. You get a decent amount of surface real estate. From what I can tell, you have a plastic finishing with a very thin glass layer on top. However, the clicks are extremely tactile. They're precise. There is little to no flex, and this is one of the best trackpads you're going to find on a PC laptop in this class segment. The keyboard is pretty nice as well. I mean, I like the black keycaps over here. The font is clear and easy to read, but I'm not a big fan of the slightly more compressed layout of the keys themselves. So I feel like with the space they had, they could have definitely stretched a little closer to the edges and made the overall keycaps larger, like the arrow keys and the enter keys, for example. However, other than that, you do have a fully backlit keyboard over here. You also get a built-in 10 keypad, which is nice. And then you have the power button, which doubles as a built-in fingerprint sensor. I want to mention the highlight of this keyboard is its typing experience. You've got a decent amount of key travel for such a shallow keyboard. It's tactile, it feels nice on the fingers, and overall this is again one of the best keyboards from a typing experience that you will find on the market if you can get past the slightly compressed layout. On a 360 laptop, the hinge mechanism is the most important physical component, and thankfully Samsung did not goof it up here. It doesn't have a lot of wobble, it's well tuned and calibrated and should do just fine for the years to come. Now as far as the display is concerned, I love the fact that it's fully glass encased all around, so you don't have any bezels sticking out. However, you do have quite a noticeable chin at the bottom. I mean, there's a lot of black space here because of the aspect ratio they chose. You will notice the side bezels though are quite immersive and narrow, and same thing with the top forehead. It's actually quite narrow and shouldn't stick out too much. At the center, you have a mediocre full HD webcam. It does well enough in bright settings, but struggles a fair bit in lower light settings. You've got a nearly perfect display over here, and I say that for a very specific reason. So things start off pretty nice. You've got a 15.6-inch AMOLED panel over here, which, as we know, Samsung is really good at making. You've also got a standard full HD or 1920 by 1080p resolution, which means you get a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now, the only limiting factor here is that you get a base 60 Hz refresh rate, which is a little unfortunate because less competitive compared to what other laptop manufacturers give at this price point. With that said though, you do have HDR certification and a peak brightness up to 500 nits, which is quite helpful because this is a glossy display, so you are going to get a lot of glare, and that high brightness helps kind of compensate for it. You also have a very responsive touch captive system here that works both with your fingers, but it's optimized truly to work with the S Pen. Depending on where you are, your model may or may not come with it. However, this is a great tool if you are in the creative fields and frequently find yourself needing a good stylus. Now, another amazing thing with this display is that you get a 100% DCI-P3 color rating as well as a 100% sRGB rating, which means if you are doing stuff like photo editing or do you just want high quality colors in general, this laptop definitely hits that check mark. A quick rundown of the technical specifications we have with this configuration. So over here we do have Intel's Core Ultra 7 256V processor. Depending on where you are, this laptop may also be available with a lower tiered Core Ultra 5 processor. Furthermore, this model specifically has 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X memory. However, the vast majority of configurations are limited to the 16 gigabyte variant. Also, we do have Intel's integrated 140V graphics over here. However, if you get the Ultra 5 model, you will get the lower tiered 130V iGPU. General performance, as you might expect, is super smooth, whether it's watching 4K videos online, surfing the web, or doing some basic Word document crunching, it's all gonna be super fast and fluid. More intensive activities like programming and code compilation, again, you will have absolutely no hiccups whether you have the Core Ultra 5 model or the one that we have over here. Now, when you are doing more intensive stuff like 3D modeling, that's where the Core Ultra 7 really does shine because we were able to process a lot more intensity in our models before we notice any sort of visible frame drop. I do know from other laptops, if you run these kind of programs on the Core Ultra 5 models, you run into that hiccup a lot faster. Also, when you are doing the most demanding activities like multi-layer 4K video editing with 10-bit footage, I was generally impressed here again because, stacking up to 3 layers, we had little to no performance drop. The frame rate was super smooth when you had live playback enabled, and again, a really nice experience. Now, keep in mind, I did have 32 gigabytes with this model. You might have 16, which will have implications on performance to some degree. Render times were also quite fast over here. As far as casual gaming is concerned, I was slightly disappointed. I found that the frame rate here was struggling to hit 60 frames per second on high settings with games like Counter-Strike Go 2 because other laptops that I reviewed that had Intel's integrated Arc 140V variant were actually hitting 60 FPS pretty consistently, so I imagine it's a software or driver issue which might get ironed out over time. Thermals were, for the most part, pretty respectable, so we found under a unrealistic peak load, this laptop can hit a maximum average surface temperature of 40 degrees Celsius. I suspect that high number is due to the slim form factor of this device, but in all fairness, a more realistic sustained load will yield you around 38 degrees Celsius, which is a more manageable number. As far as fan noise is concerned, the fan doesn't go off too often. However, if you are using it under high workload, you can expect a maximum noise level of around 48 decibels, which again isn't too shabby. Self-upgradability is quite limited, so the RAM is entirely soldered on board and hence not upgradable. However, you can replace the existing M.2 drive with another because you do have a M.2 slot available here. This laptop comes with a 68 watt-hour battery, which will realistically give you a runtime just around 10 hours with a general productivity use case. Obviously, benchmarks will yield higher results, but that is not necessarily a real-world indicator. Now, as far as the speaker quality is concerned, it's not anything noteworthy. It does have a good amount of volume, but doesn't have a lot of bass or upper or mid-range. It's a pretty flat speaker experience. Of course, here's a quick sound test for reference.
It's a blessing, new focus, no guessing, just hold an obsession. All in this possession, you got their attention. I'll leave an impression and take a redemption. Just kill no discretion. Your mind is a weapon. 11-11, it's time for progression. Oh! You could try to play it, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody and stained from the beat.
The Samsung Galaxy Book 5 360 shown here has a price point of $1,350 US. And look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That is a pretty steep price. However, from the perspective of Samsung, this is a entry-level device, while from the perspective of the greater PC market, this would ultimately be a upper mid-range device. And I do believe for the most part, Samsung does live up to the value, and in some areas they even exceed it. For example, you have an extremely clean design, a high-quality metallic exterior from top to bottom over here. Furthermore, you get a great trackpad keyboard, and of course Samsung's iconic AMOLED display, with the only limitation being the 60Hz refresh rate here. Furthermore, I also appreciate that you have fantastic performance thanks to Intel's Lunar Lake technology, and for the most part, this is a very powerful device for general and advanced productivity alike. Again, this is a great laptop if you have the budget to spare and you're looking for a high quality productivity device without having to spend money north of $1,500 with the Pro Series. In fact, I'd say for a lot of people, this is the ultimate device, especially if you want 2-in-1 functionality at Samsung's base option. Let me know what you think of the Galaxy Book 5 360. If you already have it, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.